Welcome to Inside Platform Engineering. This is episode number 1. My name is Matt Allford. I'm a developer advocate at Octopus Deploy. And today I had the pleasure of chatting with Luke Phillips about all things platform engineering. Now, one of the key takeaways I had from the conversation is that to be successful with your platform initiative, it's not just about the tooling and technical components, but rather really about engaging with your users and champions within the organization to help drive the design and capability of the platform forward. Luke has a lot of experience and information to share in this space, so let's jump into the discussion. Luke, awesome to have you here for the discussion today. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me in this conversation. Who am I? What do I do? I am a staff software engineer, software architect, platform engineering leader. I think my favorite title I've seen before is software custodian, someone who sweeps together all the best ideas from all places. I have a long career of previously just at the New York Times and then a lot of the major telecom companies in the world, Charter Communications, Level 3 Communications, CenturyLink. And I'm based in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Get to enjoy a lot of great outdoor activities, things like that. You'll find me contributing in open source or various CNCF communities, whether that's Kubernetes, Argo Project, GitOps, platform engineering, things like that.
Awesome. There is a lot to unpack there throughout our conversation today. So super excited to be doing that. And I guess, this is all about platform engineering, of course. So I think it's pretty key to baseline on your idea or your understanding, your experience of what is platform engineering? What is a platform engineer? Where did it come from? What have you experienced?
Yeah, I've received that a few times recently where people are like, "Oh, you're an excellent platform engineer. Or your career has found its way into platform engineering." Or I spend a lot of time now in what's called platform engineering forums. There's a really excellent group, Platform Engineering Coffee or Platform Coffee, and it's like, where did this term come from, or how do people identify from that? Because I know myself, I come from a application developer background, and I've had the advantage, I guess, or the privilege of in these various applications, they've either been very specialized products or technologies or kind of these smaller innovation groups or these tiger teams, and we would usually end up having to run our own um, software. And so I would get closer and closer to how do you manage the infrastructure to operate our software, and you along the way you learn a lot of interesting things about um, as you're building software, how can I lean into the architecture and into the infrastructure that I have available? What's available to me? So, as you know, if I'm going to call myself a platform engineer, I was like, well, I'm a application developer, platform engineer. Then some other platform teams that I've recently worked on, my peers had their own backgrounds in, say, network operations or pure infrastructure operations, cloud engineering, infrastructure engineering, network engineering. And so they would also get the title platform engineer. We're all platform engineers in this group. And so, is platform engineering, is that diminishing any of the skill sets that we have, whether you're really good at application development or network engineering? I don't think it's diminishing, but I think it's kind of enriching. It's really exciting where so much of the work we do, whether it's network applications, things like that, kind of plays back to that software is eating the world concept. And so everything is an API now and everything is automated and things like that. Or at least I think it's useful to think of things that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation because I think it also talks to the fact that like platform engineering or being a platform engineer, it's not an entry level role, right? You need years of experience in other facets of IT to then sort of build up to being involved in a platform engineering team. And what I like about what you just said is that you almost need those different backgrounds from different people who are in the team to help strengthen the team overall, right? You need some folks who are coming from a software dev experience or application developer. You need the network and the operational folks as well. So, um, yeah, I quite often see some threads out there on things like Reddit and stuff. Like, I want to get into platform engineering, and it's someone who's been in IT for a year or so, and I kind of think, you need to sort of build those foundations, I think, before you want to get into platform engineering, because like there's a lot to it, right? There's a huge amount. There's a lot of breadth in platform engineering.
Right, right. This is where you put the graphic up of the CNCF landscape of tools and technologies, and is a platform engineer the person who understands all of that? Um, maybe, maybe not. There's a lot of appreciation in everyone's depth in every category on that landscape, or the various application capabilities, like someone who knows databases and storage and things like that, or how to do data modeling related to that, versus how do you do SRE type tasks or monitoring things, or again, how are you going to do your application delivery space and get closer to the application developers themselves.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And so for the organizations that you've worked in and worked for, how does platform engineering come about, or how has it come about in those organizations? Is it something that just sort of evolved internally within the company, or has it been really strategic moves by the companies to say, we're investing in this initiative, and these are the goals that we want to achieve with platform engineering?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably only the most recent roles where we were starting to use the platform engineering terms, in previous experiences where either we're in a microcosm again of wanting to run the software uh, that we're building, and having a challenge, and trying to find the right balance of the tools that make our developers effective, and a little bit of overheads, like does every developer take a little bit of that mental burden of figuring out the tools, what's the right balance of developer effectiveness, and so it's been a mix in the organizations I've been, where either you tends to be, I guess, maybe a little stumbling into it, going, "Oh, if we see there's these tools and capabilities that if we can automate things and if we can kind of standardize things, we start to improve developer experience." But we haven't quite decided, do does everyone dive into that, or do we create a center of excellence around that, versus kind of like embedded DevOps type roles and things like that. There's not, I guess, yeah, it hasn't been a particular one easy answer or the other. Part of it, certainly, people in my career were um, kind of mixing how we adopt cloud technologies, or getting in or coming back out of cloud. People trying to figure out what makes for effective architecture, what makes for effective use of the cloud, things like that.
Yeah, you touched on like the tooling there and some of the tooling choices, and one of the things at least I see fairly often is this sort of tug of war between letting developers use and do what they want versus here are the tools and the processes and the golden parts, if you like, of what we've got. Can you talk a little bit around just, I guess, some of the reliance on vendor tooling, and when you've looked to the market to go and achieve something that you've needed to, like a certain goal that you've needed to achieve, versus thinking about building it yourself or doing it yourself internally within the team, and just if you've experienced that struggle between different developers or different platform engineers that want to use their own tooling, but you're trying to standardize things at the same time as well.
Um, yeah, so that's two or three more podcast episodes in that question there.
We'll have to get you
Ven-
back there. Yeah.
right, vendor selections and tool selections and things like that. It's a careful balance. I'm getting better at this myself. I think as a developer, where um, I, as an engineer, I chase after tools where, like, I love figuring out these new capabilities and different technologies and the complexities of these things and how you wire them together. I'm just fascinated by that capability, but that does not necessarily help my customers at all. There's a really great Neil Ford quote. Is along the lines of like developers chase after complexity, much like a moth after a flame or a light, often with the same result. And so it's if we're chasing after tools in those vendors without taking into account what does the customer need, what are we ultimately solving for. So I'll probably go on a little tangent here to come back around to your question of like really getting better at being truly customer focused. What's your platform trying to solve, or what is the developer efficiency or enablement that you're trying to solve for? Is it kind of the developers end tools, something that's going to run on their laptops, picking an IDE or something, versus is it what what's the software you're building? Is it getting the software package? Is it a web service versus a library that you're building? Is it um, uh, totally packaged software itself? What are you delivering? And so what works for you, or what works for your developers? And then kind of working back, is it, if I'm building a platform of web services or something, is it really just getting compute workloads managed? Is it, are we more of like a data platform? Is it more like operationalizing databases? And obviously linking it all together, the networking, things like that. So you're trying to figure out, yeah, what's the problem you're solving, and then working through like your interviews with your customers, other developers, if that's kind of what you're trying to solve for, their improvements, and through that to then kind of take a real honest appreciation of what your developers are asking for. Usually, it's um, you know, I just want to be able to, again, write code, and a lot of mental burden being taken off my plate. But also like whatever thing is going to go do this work for me, that it's totally transparent as a developer. I can dig in if I need to or not. And through that, you should then have an idea of how you start picking out your vendors. So I can, I've spent a lot of time with vendors, talking to lots of vendors, and there's lots of really amazing tools out there, people that try to integrate everything imaginable. And there's other products that are pretty good at saying we do a few things well, and we're not trying to take over the world. And you're looking kind of to understand the difference between those, and make sure you kind of deliver something that or find something valuable there. Yeah, so that's my first comment to that. I'll let you
Like
pick
you
it up.
said, there's definitely a few different episodes out of that one question, I think, and I can definitely relate to being the moth as well. I'm quite similar. I like to try and stay up to date and looking at new technologies, but at the end of the day, I sort of have to come back and tell myself, you can't be across it all and you can't do it well. So I've learned in recent years just to try and sort of settle myself down and focus on a few things. There's a few things you're setting there which we'll unpack. One of the things that you touched on was um, understanding the developers and the product and what it is that you're trying to build. And we see a lot in the community about treating the platform as a product. And I just wonder if we can get under the covers of that a little bit as to what that actually looks like when it's being implemented, in terms of like who's involved in the team that's driving a platform engineering initiative when you need to start treating it like a product. Because I feel, this is just my experience, I feel as engineers, we can have a lot of people sort of, talking to us or requesting things or asking us for things at once, which creates a lot of noise. So, how have you found an effective way within a team to sort of filter that down to these are the important things, this is what we're building towards, and this is what we're focusing on?
And kind of to your previous comment, when you were asking me how would I might pick out a vendor or something, I start to introspect and think about what is it about vendors and technologies, tools that I liked or that I was attracted to. Was it, not only that the tool did the thing I needed to do, but how well is it an open source technology tool? As I think mentioned before, like have been really involved in the Argo project, Argo CD specifically. So maybe using that as an example where it's like, oh, this technology, it has a really vibrant community. where you can interact with the maintainers or just other developers or other people that are using the tools. You have kind of power users of the tool that are out writing blogs on the internet and things like that. And so it's like, can you replicate that whole community experience perhaps on your internal platform? So as you start reaching out to developers, trying to just understand, like, hey, I want to understand what is going on. I want to start doing kind of product surveys, customer surveys, trying to find, is there an opportunity here in my organization to improve things? And through that, if I'm going to start building something, how do I um, kind of work with the right set of developers? Where do you start finding your kind of champions, people, other developers that are like really excited about what you're going to be building? As we kind of build up those power users and get their feedback, say early trials, and can they eventually, at their own fruition, start evangelizing out to the rest of the developer organization, like, hey, I'm using this and it's worked, kind of thing. So you're kind of working through that. And even as a engineer platform team, as you're seeking out to build things and understand things, I think it's critical to always be measuring. So both you're starting off in these surveys, but also to start saying, how do I measure what's going on here? And so many of the various acronyms of things to measure, whether it's Dora metrics, there's space metrics, Monk, and various other uh, things where I think every one of those, I might be butchering some of this, that there's a component of customer survey or customer interviews or things like that. You can't just look at, is my tool up all the time? Things like that. So, there's a culture around customer interaction. You really want to build up on that kind of experience. And much like, again, trying to create a lively, um, growing open source community for a project you might release, can you do that internally for a platform you might be building?
That's a really cool way to look at it, I think, is building that sort of community inside. And you talked about having those champions internally of the product, and that sort of resonates with what we see out there a lot, with open source projects that are, open to the world. Is there's sort of these champions that really drive it and start to talk about it within their own organizations. So yeah, that's really cool. On the measuring, it's interesting. We're looking at some data at the moment that we got through some surveys around. Part of it was around measuring platforms, and there were quite a few responses that we had that said that they didn't measure anything at all, but they also thought their platform was quite successful, and that was quite interesting to see. And it was there was quite a clear correlation that the more things that you measure overall, broadly speaking, the more successful your platform was for the goals that it was set out to achieve, because you could kind of see where things were heading, and if you needed to change direction or change the priority of something that you're implementing, you had the data there to be able to do that. So on the metrics and measurement, is there anything specific that you've put in place or seen that's worked really well, or is it really a collection of understanding what are the goals of this platform, and then what are the metrics that we can start to look at that actually drive those goals and start to tell us if we're achieving those goals?
Again, an excellent question of so many things we could spend another episode on as well. There's getting into some of that where things that I've seen is some of it is just measuring or having some idea of tracking how people are using your platform, um, kind of more almost like at the metadata level of people are going in and creating templates, the golden paths, and this creates an application, and this spins up various or a certain type of an application, and you see people, are they happy with that, or they go spin up many more instances of this same thing, or how are they kind of poking at what you've created for them and seeing that from that, did people stay on your golden path, or have they jumped off the path? And as they're using it, um, kind of figuring out, that's a great input of, all right, here's what do we need to adjust to the platform so people are using things the way we want, or what we might have in mind, or if they continue to try to break out, have we captured their uses, um, things like that. Some of the other thoughts around that, some of those other metrics, again, just the customer satisfaction surveys, the CSAT type um, surveys, where you're trying to just seeing what those comments are, and how, excuse me, how people are using it, or just what their feedback is. That, hey, this, loved the idea, but I never went past Hello World or something like that. Or, yeah, this was great for all these new products we're getting out there. So yeah, just kind of, yeah, there's different ways. Those what I've have enjoyed most seeing most recently is, yeah, kind of those customer satisfaction, as well as just, watching, let the everyone get in and watch that, see what happens. And
Yeah, the raw metrics are always interesting. I think especially to technical folks, we like seeing, bar charts and numbers and all that sort of stuff. But I tend to agree, like the user experience and talking to the users and just being able to listen to ideas is just so valuable, right? Like I know myself, I can get like tunnel vision, especially if I'm working on something. I'm like, oh, this is probably the way we should do it. And then someone else comes in with a fresh pair of eyes and they're like, oh, did you consider this and this? And I'm like, no, not at all. And it's just, I love that. I mean, I just love that about us being humans. We've all got different perspectives on how things should work, or how the golden paths can be put together, or what's working within the platform and what's not. So it's funny. I think over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, IT's really shifted from you're sitting at a keyboard just typing away and coding all day, and it's really shifted to being a role where you need to talk to your users and your peers and really communicate well with other folks too. So on the notion, it sounds like you're quite interested yourself in sort of getting out and talking to those people. Is that the same for all of the folks that you work with on a platform team, or do you find that there's one or two people that sort of take that product initiative, and go out there and talking to the users of the platform, or do you even find that some platforms that you've worked on are large enough to have like dedicated product folks internally that are working on the platform itself from a product perspective?
yeah, I have myself, while I'm learning so much in my customer interactions and, figuring out those things, um, kind of to the developer core of myself on the one hand, where I would just love to never talk to a human and just be coding away and making the system run that way. It's kind of fighting against that urge all the time, where it's like, oh, I will build the thing, it'll be amazing. But no, it's really, really insightful, and just so much more that I'm learning in those experiences, working with customers or other developers, and those um, those relationships, and that's really key to, I think, the whole idea of platform engineering, or really any product or platform architectures, things like that, where there's only so much, or your system only grows so much before it needs to interact with others, and you need to go along with the system as well, as far as those interactions and things like that. Um, in my previous role, and part of how I've figured out a lot of this was, certainly in a previous role, where there was a product manager that I had been working with, who was really brilliant at the job, and just really completely driven towards, um, understanding the customer, and just kind of having that person as a embedded partner in my development team. I really learned a lot, or just really appreciated, what they knew, and their attention to the customers, and that really was just an incredible experience having that. And it was a challenge for organizations, for sure. Is like, are you large enough to justify someone like in a dedicated product manager role? Do you have enough developers? Do you have a large enough organization that, instead of hiring another developer, you can dedicate someone uh, to a product management type role, product or program management, product management roles? Do you get, from that role, plus the developers now dedicated to engineering effectiveness, platform engineering? Are you getting that much return on your platforms and things like that. So I think there's great value, but you have to understand um, how productive you are and how big you are, and if it does make sense.
Yeah, I think there's definitely there's a tipping point somewhere there where it does make sense, and it sort of opens up a discussion around something else that I see out there just in general in the market is around whether you look as an organization, this is whether you look to mandate the use of the platform that you've built and that you're continuing to build on, or if you make it optional for your developers to use. And I'd be interested in your take on this and what you've seen that works well in the organizations that you've worked at. Have the platforms been sort of mandated from day number one, or is it sounds to me like it's more of an organic growth sort of thing, and then you get to a point where developers realize, hey, if I use the platform, I can actually achieve the goals that I need to a lot faster, and I don't need to worry about whether I've created the built-in security and if my infrastructure is running with all of the regulations and the standards that we need to adhere to. So I'd be keen to unpack that with you for a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to that question, as far as I think it's a really dynamic discussion, both for the platform teams, developers, the business, everyone, all the stakeholders imaginable. Because part of it, I think there's a huge strategic decision and strategic drive. Part of why do you even use cloud computing to begin with? It's like, well, this is compute and network and storage provided as a utility service is really key, I think. Or it's not me that thinks this. I think there's a broad group of people out there, strategic thinkers, that if you're modeling things in kind of if you have an x-axis of evolution of technology from genesis to utility, you want to drive to utility, kind of thing. Much like we get our power, it's just a utility, or our water, things like that. It's like getting your compute resources and infrastructure resources as utility services. Now, there's a kind of a complexity of utility services that are made available now from AWS and Azure and things like that. And so if you zoom in on that kind of corner there of, what's um, the best service that I should be adopting, and how do I plug together these various services to continue to provide sort of a utility service for my internal developers. Um, and so you can build a platform, but if the platform is kind of moving you off to that Genesis side of things, you're putting this custom code that's between the developers and your utility compute service or something like that. And if you're slowing them down, that's going to be a problem. But if you are an enabler of these, I can now get more. If your platform can enable more utility scale and better utility consumption of these various low level services, and that your developers are able to build kind of that higher order product and services, that's really what you want to be driving towards. It's, I think, where it becomes such a interesting discussion in your company is everyone saying, or I think everyone's going to have a different opinion and view of whether, like, oh, my, this thing that I build in the platform, is it really valuable, or is it slowing us down towards kind of this utility consumption? Or like, my software or my app is special and it doesn't need to, you can't use these utility offerings, kind of thing. And every special piece of software that is running more in that kind of genesis space is really more, it's a lot more expensive to run versus kind of the utility style application. So there's, in that kind of strategic space, and really being able to communicate with everyone, going, here's sort of the landscape of how our apps are connected, and um, which parts are, again, oriented towards that utility service versus custom built or things like that. And where's the cost in this value chain of how you build your application. um, it's kind of being able to really have those conversations with everyone, and be able to say, oh yeah, collectively as a business, as an organization, unless this software is our strategic differentiator, that software, yes, we take care of that. We put a lot of effort into that. That gets, kind of the very special care. But everything else needs to be just utility, off the shelf, open source, something service kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like there's another one of those sort of drawstrings between flexibility, but then also compliance with what the organization needs from the applications that are being built and developed internally. So, how have you found ways to manage that flexibility to provide developers with the flexibility that they need to still do their thing, but without without making it so closed off for the processes that they're using that they can't, adapt it to their specific use cases.
In software and everything that we build, um, there's trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, and it's being able to communicate those trade-offs and communicate those choices. And if you're going to have a dedicated platform team, there's people dedicated to making some of those choices and some of those trade-offs. And how do they work with developers to say, these are the choices that we've made. This is how it affects you. And here's, how do we build a partnership in that? And again, not just me deciding, say, as a platform engineer, that we will, you know, Kubernetes everything, and this is the only way to do things. That's not the right answer out of the box. It's going, all right. I've talked to all my developers. We're building all these sort of microservices or distributed services, and we're building out this kind of just massively horizontally scalable compute set of services. And like, all right, that now it starts to make sense. That, all right, maybe I'll Kubernetes all the things, whatever. But you've understood the developers, and you work with them to kind of understand these choices and why some of these trade offs are there and why we've gone a certain path. But it's also, you want to hopefully build or just kind of constantly having this discussion and adjusting along the way, where an architecture that you went with today, that a year from now, as the business adjusts, the developers will have to adjust. The platform needs to continue to adjust. Much like I think a comment you had made earlier of a product, not a platform, or a product, not a project kind of thing, where we're chasing after like, oh, I'll do platform engineering as a project, 6 months, will be done. Everyone else move on to something else after that. It's like, well, if we're going to build this product service, then it's ever changing, ever adapting, much like the same product, or much like the journey of your products that your business is offering externally, that they're adapting to the market. You have to work through that internally as well.
Yeah, it's like a continuous investment thing, isn't it? It's the 2-year project and then platform engineering's done sort of thing.
Right. I check
It's
the
gonna
platform box and
Yeah,
move
that's
on.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We've touched on the importance of talking to the users, the developers, talking to the team, understanding their requirements. Just on the I guess the fast feedback and the feedback loops specifically, I'd be keen to understand, like, just practically what you've seen works well in this space for communicating with developers, especially now that the world's very remote, where we're in different time zones. Is a lot of this done through systems that you've seen, or is it discussions that are had asynchronously, or are there like working groups internally that are held for discussions? I'd be really keen just to understand, like, pragmatically, how this has looked
Yeah.
with some of the experiences you've had.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we could have like an internal conference and team that would organize us in sort of like an internal developer conferences constantly. I've seen iterations of that. And it's a mix of, sometimes it's self-driven by the developers, where we're kind of like, we need to all huddle together either virtually, or let's all meet up at a headquarters or something like that. Seen some leadership sometimes that get ahead of that, and that they do that as well. But it's sort of a mix of, similar to like our earlier comments of, um, if you're trying to perhaps replicate like how a open source or real project out there in the world, how they build community, when you see the various events where they'll have webinars, they'll have meetup events, they'll have conferences, things like that. And so I've done that internally, in my experience where we've hosted like every um, when we were first launching kind of our platform, when we really got to a good place where we did these road shows of capabilities. So once a month, just anyone in the engineering organization kind of do the road show, kind of deep dive into certain features of the platform, and just keep having those conversations, letting people understand, get to see who I am or see who my peers are, and as well as meet like the product manager and things like that. Building up those relationships, having a Slack channel is like, listen, the entire product or the whole platform is now in this Slack channel, and we'll just have one Slack channel. We had a problem once in a previous experience where it's like every sub feature of the platform was its own Slack channel, and it was such a mess because if you do have a cohesive product, um, the user's journey goes through all the features ideally. So it doesn't help anyone that they're all right. My app deployed or didn't quite deploy, and I'm asking the CI or the CD channel what happened. It's like, well, you had a bad network config, and that's ruined something further down the line. Ask the next channel. Like that doesn't work. It's like again, it's if we're delivering this platform product that or there's only one channel for it, and we'll all get into that and kind of observe and watch and help people in different ways. It becomes and it's an interesting challenge, I think, that depending on the size of your organization and the size of your platform and things like that, where on the one hand you're doing all this outreach to the developer organizations of again through do webinars, do lunch and learn sessions, do once a year big internal conferences, things like that. But you also the challenges I've seen where us the platform team kind of need to do that for ourselves as well. There's when you get to a large enough platform group where there's enough separation of concerns that people doing, more networking or storage or compute work or application delivery experience, experience, things like that. And, different people along the way have a different opinion of how someone should use the platform. And you probably want to work together. So collectively, we think there's one way to use the platform. We should be working on that. And um, so it's working practice. Yeah, certainly practice that conversation internally, and then have it externally, all sorts of different forms.
Yeah, that there's some really good takeaways there, I think, for the listeners and the viewers of this. So, yeah, that's amazing. I can just imagine the cross posting that was going on in that Slack channel or Slack workspace where there were lots of different
Right.
channels for all the individual features as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah. One of the things I do want to touch on in a moment is sort of your involvement in the community, and we'll unpack that in a moment. But the wonderful thing about IT is it never stands still, right? And we're always changing and evolving and shifting. And it's Kubernetes and it's cloud and it's whatever. One of the things that I've seen you be quite involved is GitOps, and I know that you've done a number of talks. You've mentioned already previously today that you're quite involved in Argo CD as well. So I wonder if we could just spend a few minutes on GitOps, because I find GitOps to be fascinating. And when I first heard about it, and I had a few people, in the group I was working with at the time talking about it, it was made to be this, the configuration's now in Git, and you make a commit, and then something happens, and it's kind of like, yeah, that's true. And then I learned about the GitOps principles, the four that were created by the working group, and it's kind of like, yeah, those are the first two, but the second two of the automatic reconciliation, and that working is actually the key for GitOps, and having the full GitOps experience. So, and some of that came through in our GitOps report, which I know that you've read as well. So I'd just be keen to understand what your experience has been, especially when starting to adopt GitOps in an organization, and then how you as a platform engineer sort of fit into that as well.
It's been an interesting journey to GitOps since I've been a developer forever and have jumped into using Git itself when it first came into the world, 15 years ago or so. With and jumping into that, there was a great moment at my lab, or one of my very earliest companies where like, oh, let's convert everything from was it, like from an SVN something into these Git repos, and I'll figure that out, and got into Git and moved things over. And then we did some reports of like who's the top committer in this new Git tool, and it's like, oh, it's all my commits. Great. Kind of not great that I overwrote all of the SVN history, but beyond that was as a developer who, I've always, been good at writing things down and capturing some configs into Git. And so like when I heard GitOps as a term years ago, I was like, that's silly. Like I think of course I do this. I think I write everything down, or at least pretty well, or at least it's kind of, the things I'm writing down, they're kind of spread out in this repo or many repos. But I feel like I'm capturing things like that. Like you were saying, there's the four principles of GitOps. And as you work your way through it, it's kind of interesting. And then when you get a tool like Flux or Argo CD, um, there are other systems where you get to the point of when you actually get through all four principles and you run an agent that's reconciliation, and you start to see real time that you have this out of band reconciliation loop, this asynchronous tasking that's always keeping your um, Kubernetes environment, your cloud environment, constantly keeping it up to date with whatever you did in Git, and that you start interacting with your Git repo as a control plane where you add something that adds over there, you delete something that deletes over there, changes synchronizations, and you start catching like when people are going in on the CLI to your, again, Kubernetes or cloud or something like that, and they fiddle with things, and then Argo puts it back, and then you're like, oh, you all these old issues that I used to just deal with in releases and other things like that. It was like, oh, we're doing a release, and there's all sorts of hidden hacks that we put into the last release, and this new release is going to stomp over all of that. And that's part of the excitement of a release or something like that. It's always that journey was like, oh wait, that whole surprise of a release just went away now with GitOps. And so it's like once you do all the four principles and you get the agent running, it's kind of like it's what I felt was silly before was just mind blowing. For what seems, again, it seems so simple, but if you do all four principles all the way, it's really amazing. Sort of, it's again that your Git repo now becomes sort of that control tier of your application, and that you can manage it separately there. It's really exciting. And so like having lived through that the last few years, where I have used Argo CD, deploying that as a controller to our entire platform, and some of the work that I've done previously. And as we're migrating users into the platform and saying, yeah, when we instantiate this Git repo that is your application and has all of your config, there's, there can be endless debates about the architecture of like, do you do different repos for code versus configs? Same. So there's all different ways to do it. The way we had it all combined, and so every team, every developer, and they had their little Git repo, and they make a code change, that make a config change, and it all just automatically happens. Um, and again, it's that reconcile though of like, oh, I can delete things, I can clean up things, because so often, um, so much of the existing mindsets and pipelines and processes were very linear, one way pipelines of just do all the CI steps, boom, 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 and just fire it off into Kubernetes. As kubectl applies the last step, and off it goes in a cluster, and the cluster just becomes this dumping ground of everything. And you get to the point of, no, we're not going to do that, and we're going to keep the thing, the cluster is clean, or at least what's really exciting, the power tools of GitOps. And that's not even a superpower, because it's just the four principles again. But when you realize I have everything in my Git repo, and so I blow away the whole Kubernetes cluster and instantly rebuild it, everything synchronized again from your GitOps config and your GitOps agent. Like, oh, this is nice. Yeah. 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 So it's like
Yeah.
having lived through those experiences where I've really appreciated the state of GitOps report that your organization, Steve, had figured out and published recently. Seeing his results there, um, like having lived through that journey of the last 3 years, like, oh, this is Like I've lived through these pains and seen the results. I've seen the light at the other side. Or once you adopt all four, sometimes it seems intimidating that, oh, I'm not letting people fiddle in the live system anymore, or at least there's an agent that's going to kind of slap everyone's hands every time they fiddle with things. It's like, yeah, it's a little different, but it's once you get past that, it's so much nicer. You've removed the biggest impact I saw when we did this was that um, we had out of we used to track all of our we still do, they always do, track all of our outages. Why did an app go down? What caused the app? We had some very large broad categories. One of the big ones was deployments was a big reason for outages. And we had this was very fascinating because we had not planned on this right way. um, Going back to like earlier comments, or figure out what you're going to measure in a platform as you're building it, things like that. Didn't quite realize this, but now totally saw. Is like, oh, once we put in this GitOps process and our whole platform, that all the apps that are now on our platform and in this flow, like the deployment reason for an outage of an application, that dramatically dropped from deployments as a whole in our company, 60% of outages. Now it was less than 50%, down to 40% of outages was deployment based now.
Wow.
Mostly because we had not everyone at the time when I was working on that was using GitOps yet, but we saw like, oh, there's this deployments is just is going away as a issue for outages. And it's like, this is fascinating. There's so much more you can continue to dive into how you use GitOps, how you use Argo Flux around more advanced delivery strategies, where you can
Mhm.
continue to peel away at that. For us, it was like 40% of outages. Like we can continue to drive that down more and more. So there are ways, like you can see ways to drive deployment outages as a cause of um, outages. You can see it really move downwards, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing when you can sort of correlate the increase of adoption in something that you've worked on to a real tangible benefit for the business, right? That's amazing. So, did you find that sort of worked its way through like the champions and the groups, and then were developers sort of wanting to almost go GitOps by default? Was that something that you found in the organization, or was there still a challenge on getting people to like adapt their ways of thinking? Because I mean, GitOps is sort of a different way of thinking compared to how a lot of application developers have delivered their software previously, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. There's a lot of initial excitement for sure. It's like, oh, that it's always up to date. My deployments are really easy. Kind of getting more into that continuous delivery that make a commit, every commit to become something that's deployed. That's really exciting. But then you start chipping your way through the corner cases of, this commit didn't quite work. Do I want to roll back, roll forward? Kind of getting into a mindset of you're probably rolling forward now instead of doing rollbacks, or you kind of look into that space, like, is there more to do around rollouts in general? So there's those kind of discussions. It's just kind of different experiences, different moments of excitement and worry. Again, once people see kind of getting used to more of that mindset, again, that my Git repo is again my control plane. There's a lot of excitement going, oh, I can do this and I can do that. And so there's lots of excitement each time I find that new thing I can do, or just how easy it starts to make things and organize it. But then again, there's something might go wrong, or the experience. I'm learning things. So many of us come from so many backgrounds of like, I remember all these different outages I've experienced in different tools at different places at different times, and I'm forever worried about that experience. Does GitOps solve it? It's like, well, you rethink the problem, you shift parts of the problem around and things like that. So there's excitement, but there's ongoing conversations as well.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you've spent a lot of time. We've talked about community here a little bit, and I know that you're quite involved in a lot of community initiatives as well, which is really cool. And I've seen some of the talks that you've done. I've seen some of the talks that you've got that are upcoming as well. I'd just be interested to hear from you. Like, how did you just sort of fall into the community itself and just found your way through there and then started doing some talking at events, or have you worked with other people, or how have you gotten involved in that, and what advice would you have for some others that might look at some of the stuff that folks like yourself do and wonder how they can get into that as well?
Yeah. This is such a great question. It's been quite a journey getting involved in communities. Yeah, the journey getting into communities and the journey getting into presenting and talking, things like that. It's been a very long road. But I highly encourage everyone to start at some point to start figuring out, to start trying. Some of it just goes back to way long ago where the company I had started my career at level three communications. There's a ton of software development that I learned. I mean, kind of going from college into level three communications, um, the the development at the time, like software development that you learn at school versus what you did at the job was totally world apart, totally different. And so much that I started off as an intern there and kind of worked my way up. And there's just so much that I kept learning, um, and had so many incredible peers and mentors and partners there in early in my career, which I'm incredibly thankful for. But I learned so much of how to do real software development or how to do real kind of professional software development uh, through that time. But it was always kind of in this is how level three did software. There's a certain culture to our company, and this is how we did it. And so later on in my career, when I finally like stepped out and started going to some technical conferences and seeing how other people were presenting, whether it was like your Java users group or like other just small technical conferences related to web services, or like there's whole conferences just dedicated to REST and web service development because that was such the thing, or became such a hot new thing 20 years ago. Um, but is these kind of things when we're seeing all these other people, their different cultures, how they do development, how they talk about, how they think about the problems, like wow, this is so exciting. And it was really helpful to kind of see these different perspectives and go, oh, this helps me think about the problems differently. It's great. And those are great skill set to bring back to work. It's like through those where it's like, all right, I wanted to stay continued to or connected to those communities. So finding local little meetups. These were all really big, obviously before COVID, and they've shifted some after COVID now, where some communities exist maybe virtually now, some physically in your community. Certainly find any of those things, and there might be kind of your core fundamental type user groups. It was like Linux user groups, Java users group, like some core language or something like that, where you just like kind of get connected. And those smaller spaces are great places to you could try talking and sharing. And really, I think the biggest kind of nut to crack thing that I learned in so much of these experiences was just share your own experience. Like I did this at work. I mean, obviously hide whatever proprietary thing you're working on. There's like, oh, I used this technology at work. 'Cause I used to be so intimidated by it. And it's like a certain imposter syndrome concern of like, oh, I need to be an expert at Java or something like that before I can present anything. Why would they listen to me? Was when I shared some stories. This was, gosh, like maybe 10 years ago. Just there started to be. I mean, I think what we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of Kubernetes. So this would be more like 8 years ago then of as it started to kick off, there started to be user groups for Kubernetes, and so I started getting connected with a project called Brigade coming out of Deus, people that created Helm. It was an incredible community there. But like they created this project called Brigade, and I was like, oh, this is really neat. I could really use this at something I was working on. I think at Charter Communications at the time, and so started using the tool, and it was a new open source project where it was kind of there were some really easy things you could contribute back to enhance it. And so it was kind of like I'm using it and I need it to do this, and it stumbled my way through figuring out some of these commitments, but being able to just when I first shared, I think it was at a Kubernetes meetup, local one here to Colorado, I think it was in Boulder, where there was an opportunity. Just I'm starting to use this open source Kubernetes tool, and this was my experience. I am. This was me. I think at the time, like when I really started getting into Go programming and things like that, where it's like I'm not really good at Go. I'm barely understanding Kubernetes, all these things, but just getting up there and saying, "Here's the tool. Here's how I used it." That was like the initial starting to get some traction in the communities and presenting and things like that. And then now, I think like you were mentioning, this fall here in Atlanta, I get the privilege of presenting at KubeCon. I have an incredible partner that I get to be sharing with, Julia. She's fantastic in the community of Kubernetes, but also um, this is my very first time presenting at KubeCon. I've done the co-located events, gotten into some of those and other things that I presented to, and this was only in the last 3 years. But even though again, Kubernetes is 10 years old, this year, and this is my say first main event kind of presentation, I've probably applied to speak at most every KubeCon in the last 6 years or something.
Hmm.
So it does sound a little scary to have gone through, that many rejections, but now it's like I'm both figuring out, what makes a good proposal in those experiences, and a lot again, it's really about sharing your own experiences. I think is really fantastic in those discussions, and just just kind of, I would say, don't if you're young in your career, um, just try these things. Don't be discouraged, just because these are all things that I didn't know, and at I had to try, and I had to fail, and I had to make mistakes and keep trying. It's like this is something I was really interested in, and just kind of a mix of, as I got older in my career, I got more of those experiences. So then I had even more stories that might be worth sharing. So there's all sorts of opportunities, but don't be discouraged. If you don't get in the first time, it will take time. But also, again, there's so many great opportunities out there, so many smaller events. DevOps Days is still a great series of conferences. There's probably local meetups relative to where you are. Look at those, um, and get involved there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to get started is looking at the smaller groups. And one of the things is like you touched on imposter syndrome, and I need to be an expert in this thing to be able to talk about it, and it's just definitely not true. And I think at the end of the day, like everyone who's at the event watching you talk, or watching your online presentation or whatever it might be, they're all there. Everyone wants you to succeed and do well, and everyone's there to hear your story and your perspective. So I think that's a key thing to remember when thinking about putting a talk together, or even if it's just writing an article that goes online. Like, yes, people may have covered how to do that thing before, but you've got a different, or you've probably got a different experience. You've got a different perspective on it, and readers will resonate with your experience compared to someone else's. Depending on where they've come from as well. So yeah. I've got a couple of questions for you on coming back to the core of platform engineering, just on a little bit on the future of platform engineering. And unless you've got a crystal ball there, I know that this can go anyway. But I'd be keen to understand, what you've seen sort of changing, especially over the last 6 months, and maybe even 12 months. Like, what's changed in platform engineering? Where do you think we're heading to as a group and a community moving forward over the next 6, 12, 18 months? What does that start to look like?
AI everything,
Yeah.
and um, And what does that even mean? I think it's, yeah, unfortunately, it's, like the AI topic is both fascinating and a distraction at the same time. That so much of what we do as developers and architects and system designers and things like that, there's so many core fundamentals of how you build good software, so many principles behind that that doesn't none of that changes with these new set of tools that might be able to help us code a little bit faster or something. That's and writing the code itself is not the challenge. That's not necessarily the bottleneck. It really goes back to some of our earlier conversations of understanding users, those customer interactions, and trying to break apart and understand what the business problems are and how do you bring those into systems, and how do you codify those, and how do you automate those business challenges and enable a business to um, build the next higher order service, or enable them to do the next thing. So I mean, I think it's really interesting in our industry that there is just kind of a constant churn of emergent architectures and best practices and technologies. Um, I mean, there's so many previous architecture practices and ways of building systems that they probably work for most people, most systems, most of the time. So on the one hand, don't worry about keeping up with the bleeding edge of things. There's many good ideas out there, but I think that yeah, we're just constantly, turning the knobs and dials on, is it more a compute? Is it more of a network? Is it more of a storage problem? Is it more something that's at the edge? Is it more IoT? Is it in my pocket? Is it um, in a mainframe or in a server in the cloud? Or is it something like that? It's like where these things are constantly adjusting. So I think there's just kind of seeing the constant movement and just what's appropriate for your business. So there's not going to be one platform that's right for everything out there. And it's, being able to continually work through those challenges of what are the challenges of your business? What's appropriate in your platform? What capabilities appropriate? Being able to figure that out specifically. I mean, I think there's gonna be, some interesting just broadly in technology, like, I think the ubiquity of telecommunications networks as we're seeing, so many new satellite constellations go up that, are gonna provide fast, easy network connectivity everywhere imaginable. There's gonna be all sorts of very interesting things I think that are gonna come out of that, whether it's, um, how we might both just generally communicate, but trade and commerce and insights to things like that would be going on there. Like within tech itself, there's, I think, as we've gone to different layers of um, virtualization is really the wrong word here, but abstraction of a computer from going from dedicated hardware to VMs to containers to what I think we're going to see in WASM, WebAssembly.
Hmm.
Where more and more of the host system is responsible for more and more of your stack, and that your code is handling less periphery things, and we'll be dealing, just with your specific logic. So I think like as we've evolved to containers, I think WASM and WebAssembly containers, Spin is a framework for that as well. Spin containers, perhaps, where you're just gonna be able to pack in more compute density. Um, and get better utilization out of your existing compute workloads and your existing infrastructure. I think there will be a lot of interesting things there as well. So those are some of the ideas of what the future might hold. But yeah, it's kind of remits new exciting technology and just keep being good at the fundamentals of figuring out the customer problem.
Yeah, I mean yeah, that's never going to go away, right? So
Yep.
yeah, that's going to be the pillar that we have to continue to build on top of. I find the AI thing is really interesting, especially for platform engineering, because I think there's almost two facets to it. There's sort of you as a platform team, how are you using AI yourselves, but then also how are your users consuming that, and what are you providing through the platform to the users who want to, the developers who want to also use AI as
Yep.
well. So
yeah,
It's kind of two sides to that story.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's there's a couple of interesting groups around this. If you're getting into just a platform engineering, again, we mentioned before the CNCF landscape, like, oh, there's a ton of stuff on there. It's intimidating. There's an excellent group, CNOE, CNOE, Cloud Native Operational Excellence, that gives you this sort of out of the box, opinionated um, pick of, we've picked all these CNCF tools, and here's how we think they all stitch together. And here's kind of a reference, a great reference article or reference architecture on how to use these. And out of that group, they've spun up Canoe AI and agentic AI platform frameworks where they're kind of testing out those ideas. So I highly encourage people to go check out those Git repos and those communities where there's a variety of ideas. Some of it is simple as like, oh, take every platform capability we had before, whether it was Argo CD or your Backstage or various other components, and they all have these APIs. And it's like, well, let's put a MCP API on top of all of those things, and then have an agent be able to call all those APIs. Like something I could ask the AI agent saying, there was an outage last night, put together a report of what happened, and it can go call all the various tools of your platform and stitch together the answer for you. So various interesting ideas in there. My example is way simplifying what they're doing in this research, but it's all open out there. There's really some interesting things to see, and it's great that there's these all these groups that are sharing their kind of experiments with these platforms, and both kind of mixing in. It's like, where is the right fit for AI and platforms? I don't think there's a right answer today. It's very emergent in that architecture, and there's just a lot to see and a lot to adjust along the way here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, I'll put some links as well, of course, in the show notes for those that are interested in that. Awesome. I've got 4 rapid fire questions for you, Luke. I need the first thing that comes to mind as we start to wrap up here. And the first one is, how do you pronounce this word?
Coop control or coop CTL.
Very cool. Yep.
Never coop cuddle.
You're not a cuddler? No, that's okay. Cool.
Mm.
Not necessarily related to technology, but if you could instantly learn any new skill, what would it be?
Oh man. Any new skill. If it wasn't anything to do with technology, probably it would be fun to just know how to surf.
Cool. Yep. Australia's got some great. I'm not a surfer myself, but Australia's got some great
Right.
waves over here.
Very, very landlocked here in Colorado.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. What's your favorite board game or video game?
Um, Video games. I mean, just the classic Half-Life series was always so fantastic.
Yep.
Um, yeah, yeah, extremely enjoy those.
Yeah, always classics, aren't they? And the last one, where do you sit? Are you a early bird or are you a night owl for getting on the tools and hacking away at some code?
Um, I want to be a better early bird at it, but I think that productivity really starts to flow in the night owl.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like the idea of the 5 AM club, but, I've tried joining a few times, but I sort of fall my way back out of it,
yeah,
eventually, so, yeah. Awesome. I've got one last question for you, Luke, as we start to wrap up here, and I think I know where this will go based on the conversation that we've had today, which has been really awesome, but if you had some practical advice, one key takeaway from people who are looking to get into platform engineering or starting platform engineering teams, or platform teams that are just looking to increase their internal adoption and getting started with it, what's one thing that you'd take away, or one piece of advice that you'd give to them to take away from today?
if someone is looking to get into platform engineering, I would say kind of some of our earlier comments of, be good, be skilled, have a good experience and be skilled at something, whether it's a background of development or network engineering or infrastructure operations. Bring a good experience there, and then bring a openness to then work with whoever is not the skill set you have. So you're going to be an application developer working with network engineers or infrastructure operators, things like that. And so that willingness to understand a different view of the world, and how do you collectively solve a customer solution.
Look, I've had a great conversation today, so thank you so much. I just wonder if we can finish off with letting us know where can folks find you online and what are some of the events that you've got coming up that you've got some talks at as well later this year.
Yeah, thank you, Al. It's been a fantastic conversation as well. I think we mentioned a few of these before, but yeah, if you want to see me, depending when this podcast is published, next week from when we recorded, I will be at DevOps Days Rockies in Denver, giving a quick lightning talk, talking about the customer and the communities. And then in Atlanta, you will find me both at KubeCon, giving a talk there as well, kind of communities and platform engineering, as well as ArgoCon, getting to talk about Argo and interoperability with standard events. So you'll find me at those conferences this fall. If you see me out there, feel free to say hi. You can find me online, LinkedIn, just my name, Luke Phillips, or on Blue Sky at lukepatrick.dev. Um, I'm sure there's other ways you can find me. Those are all great places to start. Love to reach out, connect with people. And again, thank you, Matt, for this great conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. And I will, of course, have all of those links and some links off to your talks in the description below for wherever you're watching this. I'm lucky enough to be coming across for KubeCon North America this year, so I'll be looking forward to meeting you in
All
person
right.
and also coming to hear your talk as well. So, yeah, Luke, thanks so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you as well. Have a great rest of your day.